Hello and welcome to my channel, Making Crafts. Today I am back with the Curator's Meadow collection by 49 Market, and this is my design team project for the rubber buggy. And I've been wanting to make a journal with this, but it's a 6x8 pack. So, you know, most of the journals I make, you fold the papers in half and sew them together. So I'm going to try something different today, something I've never tried before, but I'm going to give it a try, and let's just test it out together and see how it works. So this paper pack comes with 9 double-sided patterned papers. You get 3 of each. So what I've done is I've just picked out all 9, one of each of the 9, and then I'm going to use those pages in my journal. So I've just chosen some other papers and book pages and envelopes and things that I want to put in it, but as I go and start putting it together, some of the things may not get put in it. I may change my mind, but I just pulled out some things so I have choices. So this is just a tea-stained junk mail envelope. It's just one of those well, no, actually this is when I purchased the envelope. It's just a pack of Dollar Tree envelopes, and so I've just tea-stained that. And then here's another envelope I had in my stash that was given to me by a friend. She gave me a few of these she was cleaning out, and so I'm going to try to use that one. Another smaller tea-stained envelope. I've also pulled out some field guide pages, and so I had some of these that's in black and white, and I thought they would go good with the this paper. What's it called again? I always forget. Curator's Meadow, because it has like a nature book type theme. And so I pulled out some different pages with the flowers on it, wildflowers, and some birds. I don't know if I'll use all these. It's just things to give me some ideas, get started. I also have a brown envelope and a little brown bag. And then I've pulled out some book pages. So from this book, it is the American Naturalist, and it's just a book I've gotten, an old book. Let's see, not sure how old it is. It's just one that I buy I go to the used bookstore and find books like this to use in my journals. This one's not that old. It's from 1982, I think is what it says. Originally, I think older, but the reprint, trying to say, well, copyright 1982. Okay, so that one, and so then I pulled out, here's a children's book that I had with from 1970 with some flowers and things, so I pulled a page out of it. I also have a country diary of an Edwardian lady. I'm sure most of you have heard of this one. I pulled out a couple of pages from this one that I thought goes along with the pages in the paper pack. And then here's a page from the first book I showed you. And then I've got, so here's the wildflower field guide. I got the pages out for that, the smaller pages. And then here's the larger pages, Wildflowers of North America. Here are some pages from that book. And so I chose some that had the flowers on the front and back. And then I've also got a few more field guide pages. I've got some tea-stained paper, some tea-stained notebook paper, and then a guest check. And I may go find more things to go in it, or I may use less. We will just see as I get started working on it. So let me set all this aside. So I'm going to be using some canvas type fabric for this one, but you could use muslin, you could use cotton, you could use whatever you want to use, I think. I just want to try it with the canvas, and like I said, I've never tried this, but I think you could use just about any fabric. I just like using the canvas fabric. I just like the looks of it and the texture of it. So what I've done is I've just, you know, ripped some strips down. They're about 2 inches wide. And so now I'm just trimmed them down to match the pages. So that's what I'm gonna go through now and cut my strips down to be the same height as my pages, and then we'll get started on putting this together. So I'm just going to attach the canvas to the cardstock. To do this, I'm just going to use some Fabri-Tac, and I'm running a line of glue on the edge of the cardstock, and then I'll attach the canvas. When you're using Fabri-Tac with fabric, sometimes the glue will show through, so I always try to add it to the item that I think will not have it show through. So like if I was using 2 pieces of fabric, I would add the glue to the thicker fabric. But since I'm using fabric and paper, I'm just going to add the glue to the paper. And when I do this, I'm trying to overlap the canvas about a half an inch or so. I want to be sure that I have a large enough edge that I can sew down it, because when I come back, once the glue is dry, I'm going to come back and sew down the edge. So I want to make sure I have enough room to sew down it as well, but I also want to have enough on there so that it has a good grip onto the canvas. And like I said before, this is the first time creating one of these, so this is in my mind how it all should work out and be fine. So I did tear down the strips of the canvas, but they are still a little too long. I didn't want to tear down too much because I do have other size papers that I'm using. So I'm just going to come through on each one, and I'm going to just trim off the extra, and then I'll just fray it. And to fray it, I'm just going to pull on the edges there. I just want a little bit of fray. I like the look of the frayed edges on canvas. So I'm first just going to go through and do all of the cardstock, all of the 49 Market cardstock, and then I'll come back through and I will work on some of the other pages that I chose to use. Now for the cardstock, I am just using one piece of cardstock on each side of the canvas so that it'll kind of balance out the book. When you'll have a cardstock in the front of the book and a cardstock in the back of the book. And so that's why I'm just trying to balance it out like that by putting cardstock on both. And you'll notice that sometimes I flip the back side up or I flip the right side up, just depending on the mood I was in and how at that moment I felt like it should go in my book. But there really is no right or wrong way with that, I don't think. It's however you want the pages to look when you flip through your book. So here is one of the book pages, and I just added exact same pages side to side. So some of the book pages I have two, or like the notebook pages, I have two of those. So I'm just going to put those side by side onto the canvas so that there'll be one in the front and one in the back, and that helps me to keep it all evened out so that not all of the book pages from that book are in the front, or not that all the notebook pages are in the front. So if I put one on each side, I know there'll be one in the back and one in the front. But then there are some things that I only had one of. Like I only had one of the yellow envelopes, and I only had one of the flower book pages, the one where I got from the little children's flower book. And so this book page, I only had one from this book. And so then the yellow envelope. So I decided that I would just put one on each side of the canvas for this. So there won't be exactly, you know, everything won't be the same in the front and back, but that mixes it up a little bit. And so this cardstock is very sturdy cardstock. So I am going to score it so that I can fold it, because I don't want my pages to be 6 inches wide. This cardstock I think is 6 by 8 or 6 by 9. And so I like the height, but I don't want the width for that for my journal. It would be fine to have a journal that width, but I was just wanting a thinner journal. So I'm just eyeballing where I think, for the first one, where I thought that I should score, and then I'm just going to go through and score all of them about the same spot. Now they don't have to be exact as long as you stay within the width, like either as wide or shorter than each one, if that makes sense. So I used the first one that I scored as my guide for the width of all the pages, and then I'm going through and I may score a little bit more or a little less on each one, but it is about the same. I'm just folding it back because I know that I can come back later and trim it off if I don't want those pieces. So I'm just going to fold them for now, and then if I decide that I don't want some of these edges, I will just trim them off later on. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the book pages. I'm going to fold them over, and some of the book pages I'll score and some that I'll just fold over depending on the thickness of the book page. Scoring it does help me get a straighter line, so once I have my scoreboard out, most of the time I will just use it, but typically if I'm using book pages and things, I just fold by hand if I don't have my scoreboard out, so you can do it without the scoreboard. It's just a little harder for me to get straight edges. So now that my glue's dry, I'm just going to start sewing these, and for some of these or most of them, I'm going to use the straight stitch to just stitch them on, and then I will for some, I will use the zigzag stitch if I feel like it needs it. Like the notebook paper, I go through and use the zigzag stitch so that it will, if you notice, I left the edges where you tear it out of the notebook, and I wanted those edges on my page, but I want to make sure that it doesn't tear loose from that, so I am going to zigzag over that dotted line on the perforated line on the notebook page so that I'm sure that it does stay in the book good. And I'm using a rather long stitch length, and I have sped the video up now because I knew you didn't want to sit through all the sewing, but I thought I'd give you a little idea of how I did sew these together. And so for the straight stitch, used a very I think it was like maybe a 4, 3.5 or 4 stitch length. I wanted a long stitch length so that it didn't gather up the paper or anything. And so here, this is the one I'm just going to switch over to the zigzag stitch. So I'm going to do all my straight stitch first, and then I'll come back to the zigzag stitch. But I really enjoyed sewing the paper together. I've got it sped up here, so it wasn't that fast, but I thought it was very relaxing just to sew these onto the canvas because you're just doing a straight stitch. It's nothing major. You just run it through your machine. And so it was a relaxing day just to sew that straight stitch. It does take a little bit to sew all these on, but I did enjoy it, and that wouldn't hinder me from making another one, even though it took a while to sew it on. I really love the look of these pages sewn to the canvas. And I did decide to just go with a kind of a off-white cream color thread for this. I think my bobbin may have had white and the top had cream, but I did just decide to do that because I didn't want the stitches to stand out too much on each page. So now let's work on the cover before we finish up the pages. So for the cover, I have cut out the size I needed for the cover out of canvas, and I cut out 2 pieces of canvas, and then I've just sewn them together with a messy stitch. And I did use the dark brown thread for this because I really wanted this to stand out as part of the decoration on the cover. I've also tried to fray all of the edges on the cover, on both pieces of fabric. I've tried to fray the edges so that it has kind of a rugged look to it. Now this is a piece of fabric that I got from the rubber buggy, and I'm so excited that we now have fabric in the rubber buggy. And I'm pretty sure this is a Tim Holtz fabric. I will list all the products below that I am using from the rubber buggy, but that we now have fabric. We now have Tim Holtz fabric, but then there are other brands of fabric as well in the shop, so you'll have to check those out. And I will link to this one, and I'll try to link to the fabric section because there's a good selection, and I'm excited because now I can buy my cardstock and my fabric all in one area, and all in one store, and no having to pay shipping 2 different places. And even the shop, it has free shipping after a certain amount. So I'm excited that I can get all of my journal supplies in one little stop. So now I'm working on the decoration for the cover, and these are some Tim Holtz frames that I got from the shop as well. And I have just cut down one of the pieces of cardstock from this paper pack, and I like these little birds with the wording, so I've cut that down. I'm going to put it behind this frame, and then I'm also using some die cuts from Tim Holtz, and I got these from the shop, but I'm not sure if we have any more in stock or not, but I will list them, and I'll take a look when I edit the video and when I take and upload it, and I'll see if we still have any. I can't remember, but I'm just using some of these on the cover as well. I like the wording here, but I just wanted to cover it up with a little bit of greenery because this is like a nature book. My whole idea for this was like a nature study book or a nature field guide, kind of the Diary of a Country, what is it, Diary of a Country Lady, something like that. That kind of notebook. I just want it to be kind of a field guide kind of look. So then this is another frame from the same pack. I forget how many frames comes in this pack, but you get quite a few frames. I've used them before in other videos and other projects, but I decided to pull them out. And for this one, I wanted to layer the frames up. I just wanted to add some more dimension to my cover. So I decided just to layer these on top of each other, and I'm just using Tombow glue to glue them together. So now that we have the cover decoration made and we have the fabric torn down, it's time to go ahead and sew our pages into our book. And so to do this, I'm just going to center up the pages inside of the cover, and then once I have the first one centered up, I'm going to use as my guide to center all the other canvas strips up. Like I mentioned before, the canvas strips are about 2 inches wide, and so I measured them all to be about the same width, so that way when I stack them up inside the cover here, I can just center the fabric strips up and not worry about the book pages, where they stick out or not. And then for this page, I'm just adding a page in that doesn't have canvas, just to mix it up a little bit. And I am just putting the center of that page in the center of the canvas. And I decided to add in some tea stain paper, and I did not sew it to each side of the canvas. I decided just to fold it. I wanted to mix it up. And so this sheet, you can see the edges on the pages, how where I tore them out of the book, it was really ragged looking. but I think that that is so pretty. I like that. I don't know why, but right there, I love the edges, so I just left them like that. And so I'm just mixing up my pages. So I'm sure if you're watching this, you've made a journal before. If you're new to journal making though, all I'm doing is I'm mixing up, like, I try to not have all the cardstock together or all the same book pages together. I want to do a mixture so that I have the cardstock and then some book pages and maybe some notebook paper or some tea stain paper, and just mix it up a bit so that when you flip through the journal, you have a lot to look at and a lot to take in, and it doesn't look so uniform. So here is my center page. I did decide that I wanted the cardstock from the paper pack as my center page, and so I chose, when I sewed this on, I made sure that I had the two front sides showing so that it would look really good for the center. So now I'm just going to clip it together like I do any other journal, but I will say this one is a little harder to clip together. I said flip together. It's harder to clip together because you're having to, when you have paper and you fold it in half, everything seems to just stick together good and you can just sew it. But the fabric does add a little bit of trouble, but it's okay. I would still do it again because it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. So I'm going to use a 5-hole stitch on this one. I don't know the correct name for it, but it uses 5 holes. So what I do is I just eyeball them. I don't measure. If you want to measure, you could measure the length of your pages and then divide that by 5. But what I'm doing is I'm eyeballing the center of the pages first, not the cover, but the center of the actual pages. And then I'm also going to punch a hole or use my awl to put a hole in about 1 inch from the top of the book page. So that's probably about 1.5 inches from the top of the cover. But I just look at the book pages and eyeball 1 inch. And then I also put another hole in the bottom about 1 inch from the bottom of the book page, which once again is probably about 1.5 inches from the bottom of the cover. But I'm looking at the book pages when I eyeball putting these holes in. And then all I'm going to do is just look in between. So I have the 3 holes here. Hopefully you can see them on camera. It's kind of hard to see. Even in person with the fabric, it's hard to see. But I'm just going to go in between the first and second hole. And I'm just going to eyeball the center there again and punch another hole. And then I will do the same thing at the bottom. I'll look between the third and, now it's the third. So the third and the fourth hole, and I will put another one. So now we're down to 5. So hopefully that makes sense. So you're just dividing up your book page by 5. So I'm just going to use some of this cotton thread to sew it together. And this is some thread that I use, you've seen me use before to sew my journals together. Now I'm not adding wax to this one since it is mostly fabric that I'm going through. I kind of want to leave it the soft thread that it is. So for this one, I also don't want to tie, normally I tie my books together on the inside and you have just like the little knot or bow on the inside. But this one I don't want to do that. So for it, I want to tie on the outside. So I'm going to start on the outside with my sewing. So to do the 5-hole punch, and I've showed this before in other videos, but in case you hadn't saw those, it's very easy to do. I'm just going to come through the center of my journal first, starting from the outside. And then I'm going to go up to the second hole from the top, and I'm going to go from the inside of my journal to the outside. And I will say with all this fabric, it is hard to find your hole on the outside of the cover. Some fabrics are like that, especially the canvas. It's very forgiving, so it will lose the hole if you take a little bit of time. So then I'm just going to go from the outside in on the top hole. Once I have this one, I'm just going to go back down to the second hole, back through where we have been through before. And this is a fairly easy stitch. You're just weaving in and out, in and out. So you will see if you miss somewhere sewing, because on the inside of the cover, you're going to have stitches all the way down without any gaps. Now here I realized when I put my stitch through that I forgot and left too long of a tail on the thread. So you want to be sure that you don't leave that long of a thread tail onto your thread because you won't have enough to finish sewing your book together. So I'm just adjusting the threads now. So if you did that, it's no big deal. You can still go back if it's, if you've caught it in the middle of sewing your book together. You can just go back and adjust the threads. You just pull on each thread until you get it all tightened back up where it needs to be. So once I get it tightened up, I'm just going to go onto the outside where I've went through the second hole now. I went from the second hole on the inside to the outside. And this really is not as complicated as it sounds. It's really hard to explain. I feel like it sounds complicated, but when you do it, it's really easy. It's not that hard. So now from the second hole, we're going to go back into the center hole, just where we started our stitches before. And the canvas is fairly thick. I think it felt thicker than sewing book pages together. So it was a little harder to get my needle through and to tighten everything up, but I still enjoyed the process and I still love the idea of using the canvas for the spine. So then we're just going to bring our thread and go through from the inside now to the outside on our fourth hole. So we're just going through our fourth hole to the outside. And I will say the holes on the inside show up way better than the holes on the outside. So when you go to the inside to sew from the inside to the outside, it's a lot easier than when you're on the outside trying to sew in. So each time I'm having to come from the outside in, I do have to go back inside my book and I have to use the needle to open the hole back up because the hole stays on the inside, but it didn't seem to stay on the outside. And I think that's because I used my awl starting from the inside. But that's okay, I can still do that. And once you press your needle through, you can see the opening. And as soon as you get the needle through, just flip your book around and sew it right through the hole. So we're just going from the outside in on the fifth hole. So once we get through the fifth hole, you'll see we're going to fill in that gap. Like I was talking about, there's gaps and you'll see that you need to. So you see on the inside here, there's one gap left in between the thread of the fourth hole and the fifth. So now that shows us we just need to go back through from the inside to the outside with our fourth hole. And we're just going to go pull it through to the outside. And then I'm just going to tie these threads together because I'm going to come back and add the fabric later over top of the threads, and I'm not going to worry about having a bow or anything fancy. I'm just putting 2 or 3 knots in it just so that it's tight enough to hold my journal together. Because once I decorate the cover, the strings are going to be glued down and they're going to be hidden. So we have our journal sewn together now, and it's really exciting to see this come together because I had no idea if this would work. But I love how this technique has turned out. I love the looks of the canvas on the pages and with them being on each page and you seeing the stitching on each page. I love the frayed canvas, on the center of your pages. I really love all the texture and all the things it gives you to look at in this journal. It really, really changes the journal up to use these fabric strips for the center, but I really love how it looks. And I'm super excited about this journal now. When I started to sew it, I had no idea how it was going to come together and if this would work. And the idea that I didn't know if it would work out because I've never done this before. But I'm loving how it looks, and I love how all the pages look together. So this one is going to be a lot of fun to work in. So now that we have all of our pages in, I do like to go through my book once I sew the pages in to be sure there was nothing that was sewn in incorrectly. So now that we have all of the pages in and they're all in the right orientation and they're all look good, I'm going to add this fabric to my edge and cover up my stitching. And I'm also going to add this piece of burlap to the cover, and then I'll add my frame on top of the burlap. Now this burlap does have the white embroidery on it, but that's okay because the frame's going to cover it up. If I'd had some plain burlap, I would have used that instead. Now here's how I do mine. I know there's different ways to put a journal together, so my way is not like the only way. But I like to start at the spine. When I'm adding the lace or the fabric or anything to the cover, I like to start at the spine and just glue a line of glue down the spine and start there with my piece of lace or my piece of fabric. And so I am adding the Fabri-Tac this time to the actual cover, because I want to be careful that I don't have so much glue that it shows through my thinner fabric. So the fabric here from the Tim Holtz fabric that I'm going to add on the edge, it has more of a cotton feel. So I want to be sure that I smooth down the glue and everything so that it doesn't show any wetness through or any glue through the fabric. I don't know that it would show through, but I was a little nervous that it might. So I know with some thinner fabrics it does. So I wanted to be sure that I don't put a gob of glue down the spine first and have it showing through. So I have my fabric and I'm just kind of laying everything out to see if I like how far the fabric's coming over, but I really don't. So I'm just going to pull it back a little bit, readjust it before the glue dries. I'm just going to readjust the fabric because I want more on the back than I do on the front. And then once I have it adjusted, I'm just going to come through and I'm going to glue the edges down on the front and the back. And when I add the glue, once again, I'm just adding it to the canvas so that hopefully it doesn't show through my cotton fabric. And I'm also just using the nozzle of the Fabri-Tac bottle to smooth down the glue, so I'm not leaving, gobs of glue that would actually seep through or show through the fabric. And so far it's working great. It's not showing through. And so I'll do the same thing for the back. And it's so exciting to see a journal like this come together because I've been thinking about this journal for quite some time, but I hadn't sat down and actually started making it. So when I started making it, I was so excited because and when it started coming together like this and it's all working out, I really was excited. This is my style journal. I love this style nature journal kind of look. This paper was perfect, and then adding the book pages because I love nature journals and nature books. So I have books here that I don't even use my junk journals that I actually look at and read that are nature books or nature journals. And so that's kind of the theme I was going for with this journal. And so I did see in the shop that 49 & Market has another paper pack that has a nature theme to it. I think it's a newer paper line as well. So I'll have to link to that if we still have any in stock, and I'll put the name of it down below so you can check it out as well. I'm thinking I may make a journal or something with it. I want to do something with it if I get time in my schedule. These are more of the summer journals, and it's almost getting time to start doing our fall and winter style journals and holiday journals. So we'll see if I get enough time. I want to work with that paper pack as well. So now I've added the burlap. I did add the glue to the burlap, hoping that it will help it to stay stuck down. And then I'm going to add a lot of Fabri-Tac to the back of this frame because this frame is fairly heavy for, it's not heavy, but to have these two layers of frames together, I felt like it was fairly heavy. So I wanted to be sure that I work with it and add enough glue that it stays on. So I'm just going to work really with it for a few minutes, just pressing down from the inside and from the outside. And so I think that this will be a good stopping point because we now have our cover and our books put together. So all we have left to do is to start decorating the journal. And so I'm excited to get started on it, adding the pockets and adding some decorations. I don't think I'll be adding a lot of decorations because I don't want to cover up the cardstock here. These book pages, some of them are so pretty I don't want to cover them up, but then there's others that are pretty plain that need something added to it. So I will come back in a few days and I will add pockets and different things to this journal, and I'm excited to get started on adding the things to it. So be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll know when I upload the next video decorating this journal. And if you will hit the like button, that really helps my channel out in the YouTube algorithm and helps others to be able to see the video. Well, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.